Good morning, students. Today we will study about the Indian steel and iron metallurgy. Before we study this topic, let us understand the meaning of a few terms which we will come across. First one is metallurgy. It is a branch of science and technology concerned with the properties of metals and their production and purification. You can also say that metallurgy is the technique or science of working or heating metals so as to give them certain desired shapes or properties. Another one is smelting, the process of obtaining a metal from rock or soil by heating it to a very high temperature, or of melting objects made from metal in order to make something new. Smelting का मतलब गलाना होता है, किसी को पिघला के नई चीज बना सकते हो. Bellows, a device or equipment that can pump air. To study about Wood's steel, we must know about the famous story of Tipu Sultan, who ruled Mysore till 1799 and fought 4 wars with the British and died fighting with his sword in his hand. Tipu's legendary swords are now part of valuable collection in museums in England. So the British took away the famous sword of Tipu Sultan along with them, and we can see them now in the museums in England. But do you know why the sword was so special? The sword had an incredibly hard and sharp edge that could easily rip through the opponent's armor. This quality of the sword came from a special type of high carbon steel called Wood's, which was produced all over South India. Wood's steel, when made into swords, produced a very sharp edge with a flowing water pattern. This pattern came from very small carbon crystals embedded in the iron. You can see some of the collections of Tipu Sultan's swords here. We can see them all in museums now. It's a dagger. Francis Buchanan, who toured through Mysore in 1800, a year after Tipu Sultan's death, has left us an account of the technique by which Wood's steel was produced in many hundreds of smelting furnaces in Mysore. In these furnaces, iron was mixed with charcoal and put inside small clay pots. Through an intricate control of temperatures, the smelters produced steel ingots that were used for sword making, not just in India but in West and Central Asia too. So Woods is an anglicized version of the Kannada word Ukku, Telugu Hukku, and Tamil and Malayalam Urukku, all meaning steel. These are the traditional methods of smelting iron. You can see the woman holding a device in her hand, that is a bellow for pumping air into the furnace. Wood's steel sword makers, you can see the picture of them. Indian wood steel fascinated European scientist Michael Faraday, the legendary scientist and discoverer of electricity and electromagnetism. Spent 4 years studying the properties of Indian woods from 1818 to 1822. However, the wood's steel making process, which was so widely known in South India, was completely lost by the mid-19th century. Can you guess why this was so? The swords and armor making industry died with the conquest of India by the British, and the imports of iron and steel from England displaced the iron and steel produced by craftspeople in India. So now there were no small kingdoms with their own personal army to protect the boundaries. The whole of India, almost the whole of India, was under the British rule. And with the changing times, swords and armors were no more in use. Their place had been taken by rifles, pistols, matchlocks, muskets, cannons. So the sword making industry in India lost its importance, and people or the iron smelters who produced high quality of Wood's iron slowly lost their job. The next topic is abandoned furnaces in villages. Production of wood steel required a highly specialized technique of refining iron, but iron smelting in India was extremely common till the end of the 19th century. In Bihar and central India in particular, every district had smelters that used local deposits of ore to produce iron, which was widely used for the manufacture of implements and tools of daily use. The furnaces were most often built of clay and sun-dried bricks. The smelting was done by men, while women worked the bellows, pumping air that kept the charcoal burning. You can see the iron smelters of Palamu, that's Bihar. We call it Bihar because earlier it was Jharkhand was a part of Bihar, so all the reference goes as Bihar for that time. And Jharkhand, being a part of Bihar, had rich reserves of minerals. So most of the tribal people, they were dependent upon the forests and the iron ore deposits for their livelihood. They were very good at smelting iron. You can see the picture of a bellow here, that big box sort of a thing through which air was pumped to keep the furnace burning. The iron smelters of Palamu, you can see here. The people, the Agarias, these are the ancient iron makers using ancient techniques. The Agarias and the Asur, the primitive tribes, they are still smelting iron, but only for their personal use, not for their livelihood. By the late 19th century, however, the craft of iron smelting was in decline. In most villages, furnaces fell into disuse and the amount of iron produced came down. Why was this so? One reason was the new forest laws about which we have studied in chapter 4. When the colonial government prevented people from entering the reserved forests, so when the local people were not allowed to enter the forests which were reserved by the Britishers, they were not able to find wood for the charcoal, which was very much essential for iron smelting, and they were not able to find iron ore also. Defying forest laws, they often entered the forest secretly and collected wood, but they could not sustain their occupation on this basis for long. Many gave up their craft and looked for other means of livelihood. In some areas, the government did grant access to the forest, but the iron smelters had to pay a very high tax to the forest department for every furnace they used. This reduced their income. So either they were not allowed to enter the forest to gather wood for charcoal and iron ore, and in places where they were allowed to enter the forest, they had to pay a very high tax to the forest department for every furnace that they were using for smelting iron. So they hardly were able to earn enough for their families. So slowly and slowly, they abandoned their craft and either started working in the cotton mills, newly set up cotton mills, or iron and steel factories which were set up, or else they became simple agricultural laborers or went out to work in plantations. Moreover, by the late 19th century, iron and steel was being imported from Britain. Ironsmiths in India began using the imported iron to manufacture utensils and implements. Instead of using the locally available iron, they were now making utensils and implements from the iron imported from Britain. This inevitably lowered the demand for iron produced by local smelters. By the early 20th century, the artisans producing iron and steel faced a new competition from the newly set up iron and steel factories in India. So the iron and steel factories which came up in India. This is actually the story of the Tata Iron and Steel Company, TISCO, that started producing steel in 1912. It was set up by Jamshedji Tata. So the year was 1904. In the hot months of April, Charles Weld, an American geologist, and Dorabji Tata, the eldest son of Jamshedji Tata, they were traveling in Chhattisgarh in search of iron ore deposits, but were not successful to find source of fine quality of iron ore. But one day, after traveling for many hours in the forest, they came upon a small village and found a group of men and women carrying basket loads of iron ore. So these people were the Agarias. Agarias are an Indian community of iron smelters. When asked where they had found the iron ore, the Agarias pointed to a hill in the distance. And finally, Weld and Dorabji, when they reached there and inspected the hill, they found that they had the finest ores in the world in the Rajhara hills. So they had finally found the source of fine quality iron ore for their iron and steel factory. But again, there was a problem. The region was dry and water necessary for running the factory was not to be found. So the Tatas had to continue their search for a more suitable place to set up a factory. And a few years later, a large area of forest was cleared on the banks of the river Suvarnarekha to set up the factory, and an industrial township, Jamshedpur, came up. And however, the Agarias helped in the discovery of a source of iron ore that would later supply the Bhilai steel plant. So the Bhilai steel plant gets its iron ore from the Rajhara hills. So TISCO was set up at an opportune time. All through the late 19th century, India was importing steel that was manufactured in Britain. Expansion of railways had provided a huge market for rails that Britain produced. For a long while, British experts in the Indian railways were unwilling to believe that good quality steel could be produced in India. So they were not willing to take up steel from the Tata or Tata Iron and Steel Company, TISCO. They were not willing to take steel from them. They were very much willing to import steel from Britain and use it for the expansion of railways in India. By the time TISCO was set up, the situation was changing. In 1914, the First World War broke out. Steel produced in Britain now had to meet the demands of war in Europe. So imports of British steel into India declined dramatically, and the Indian Railways turned to TISCO for supply of rails. So finally, the Britishers had to look up to TISCO for the supply of rails. As the war dragged on for several years, TISCO had to produce shells and carriage wheels too for the war. By 1919, the colonial government was buying 90% of the steel manufactured by TISCO. Over time, TISCO became the biggest steel industry within the British Empire. And in the case of iron and steel, as in case of cotton textile, industrial expansion occurred only when British imports into India declined and the market for Indian industrial goods increased. This happened during the First World War and after. So First World War came as a very good opportunity for Indian iron and steel factories and Indian textile factories also to survive and grow. As the nationalist movement developed and the industrial class became stronger, the demand for government protection became louder. Struggling to retain its control over India, the British government had to concede some of these demands in the last decades of colonial rule. In most of the countries, if an industry is set up, it is supported by the government or the local government over there for it to flourish. But in India, the Britishers did not want to support Indian industries. They were all the time making profit out of India, either selling their goods in India and treating India as a vast market, or taking away raw materials from India for their own industries, manufacturing the products in their industries and selling them in the Indian market at a very high price. So all these things did not favor the Indian industries, and slowly what happened? They started to decline. So the chapter is over here. Now let us study about the case of Japan. Early years of industrialization in Japan. The story of industrialization of Japan in the late 19th century presents a contrast to that of India. Let's see how. The colonial state in India, keen to expand the market for British goods, was unwilling to support Indian industrialists. In Japan, the state encouraged the growth of industries. So we can see two different attitudes of the government. The Meiji regime, which assumed power in Japan in 1868, believed that Japan needed to industrialize in order to resist Western domination. So it initiated a series of measures to help industrialization. Postal services, telegraph, railways, steam-powered shippings were developed. The most advanced technology from the West was imported and adapted to the needs of Japan. Foreign experts were brought to train Japanese professionals. Industrialists were provided with generous loans for investment by banks set up by the government. Large industries were first started by the government and then sold off at cheap rates to business families. So we can see the government is taking a wholehearted interest in promoting the industrialists. In India, colonial domination created barriers to industrialization. In Japan, the fear of foreign conquest spurred industrialization. But this also meant that the Japanese industrial development from the beginning was linked to military needs. Whatever be it military needs or anything, still Japan even today is one of the leading nations with the latest technology in everything, being even though it is a very small country in terms of area, it is one of the best where technology is concerned. All this happened because the government supported and helped the growth of industries. So with this we come to the end of the chapter. There are some questions I would like you to answer. There are some pictures of Tata Iron and Steel Factory. Who are the Agaria? What is Woods? Define smelting. How did disco grow in importance? So if you read the chapter, you will very well find all the answers in your lesson. Read the chapter thoroughly and answer the questions in your copy. Thank you, children.